Hey TFA fam! On today's show, we are comparing our top 10 fantasy quarterbacks for the 2019 fantasy season.
Hike!
Welcome back to the Fantasy Authority Podcast. Like all of you in the fantasy community, we love rankings. So for the next few weeks, we are going to give you our top quarterbacks, our top running backs, and our top receivers heading into the NFL draft. Now, these are going to be our current top fantasy options right now, pre-draft rankings. So before we get into that, I want to remind you that if you are listening to our podcast through your podcast software of choice, make sure you hit us up with a follow there so you can get all your new content. If you are following us up on YouTube, smash the like button, hit subscribe. You'll get notified every time we put up a new video, which is going to be much more often this season, so trust me, it'll be, well, worth it. So now that we are into, I guess it's pre-draft, guys. We are getting ready for the NFL draft. It's less than 3 weeks away, so it's time to talk some quarterbacks. For those of you who are on YouTube, I have each of our top 10 quarterbacks up on the screen below each of our faces and each of our names, so you can kind of get a head start on who we have and where we have them. You can see just how ridiculous Kev's rankings are already. We don't even have to talk about it. But before we get into that, let me just welcome these guys to the show. Ryan Alexander, you here laughing over there. Ryan Williams, I'm sorry. Dude, I always look at your Twitter name, and then I read that. You gotta change it. You gotta either change it to not have Alexander in there, or change it to Ryan Williams because you're confusing me.
It's underscore W at the end, though, Ant.
But it doesn't say Williams, and like my eye's looking at your picture, and I see Alexander, and I'm like, oh, I done just said Ryan's middle name instead of his last name. So
we got the Twitter game going all bad. I got no picture in the profile. I got Alexander underscore W. Throws everybody off, including you and Ben, who's been a guest on the pod. Or Kevin doesn't even say my name anymore. He just says that guy.
You should actually change it to Ryan Trash Takes underscore W.
Good.
Came out the gate firing.
Yeah, we're firing it up already. So now the introductions are out of the way. Not that we needed them. You know who these guys are. We're here. We'll be back every week in the season for you. In the off season, we don't know. We'll try every week, but we'll see how it goes. Let's just dive right into the rankings, guys. So the first thing I noticed is there's quite a bit of variance amongst our top 5 here. So we have Baker Mayfield as high as 2 and as low as 5. Patrick Mahomes across the board at 1. No questions asked there. Aaron Rodgers jumps between 2, 3, and 4. Deshaun Watson jumps between 2, 3, and 5. Yep, 5. Got Russell Wilson mixed in there. There is a ton of variance here. So I'll jump to Kev first because he went all in on Baker Mayfield with the OBJ, with the Demetrius Harris. He has Baker Mayfield at number 2 behind Patrick Mahomes. So Kev, get us started with this Baker Mayfield love.
Yeah, we talked about it on a previous show, but I mean, Baker, is the truth. And I mean, he was solid last year, had only 14 games, 3,800 yards, 26 touchdowns. I mean, and that was without someone like, OBJ. It's kind of interesting so far. I know we'll get into it probably when we talk about wide receivers in a few weeks, but like people seem to be like down on him, and I don't understand that. But Baker Mayfield, I don't know how anybody can not have him in the top 5, and there's some people who are against Baker Mayfield, don't think that he's going to make that big of a jump this year. I don't see how he doesn't. Like, that offense is so good. It's so stacked. Like we talked about, in the free agency show, you could make an argument that they have the best offense in the league. And I am a Chiefs fan, a truther, whatever you want to call me. But like, their offense is that good, and they don't even need Kareem Hunt, but their backfield with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt and Duke Johnson still, which sounds like Duke Johnson probably gets traded. But regardless of that, like, I just think that entire offense, like, is going to be so good. Baker Mayfield take another step forward, with an offensive-minded coach, and Hugh Jackson, thank goodness, is gone. So I just don't see how he doesn't with all the weaponry that he has. And I mean, like I said, you can make a case that they have the second best, if not the best offense, in the entire league.
Yeah, I don't understand the hate towards Baker Mayfield as well. I mean, I loved Baker Mayfield going into last year's draft. I thought he should be the number 1 overall pick. Now, I wasn't with you guys last year to even talk about it. So, like, I was just about to say, well, you guys know I clamored for him last year, but you don't know I clamored for him last year. I did. I was really hoping that the Browns would go with Baker first overall. I watched all the quarterbacks. I love quarterbacks. He was by far the best one, I thought. He just brought that savvy with him. And I think that's an underrated thing. Like, a quarterback with savvy and a quarterback who can lead. I just think that's so underrated. And, you know, if you look at cases, you know, and we always jump to Jamarcus Russell and Ryan Leaf, and those are the 2 most extreme cases, but those guys couldn't lead men. And then if you look at Brady Quinn, he was just a gym rat, and Tim Couch, I don't really know the whole story there, but obviously he didn't work out either. So you got to have some swagger at the quarterback position these days.
You really do, and it's been interesting because like really this generation of young talent that we're seeing coming in is far more outspoken and, you know, shows a lot of swag. I mean, you have Patrick Mahomes, you have Baker Mayfield. I mean, Josh Rosen was awful last year, but that was kind of a knock people had against him because he was so confident in himself. And I feel like that's kind of the new generation of quarterback that we're seeing. Kyler Murray this year, same way. So I do think it brings more fun into the game. You know, I mean, watching Patrick Mahomes, for example, last year was so much fun with the things that he's able to do. But like, and I think Baker brings the same thing. You know, he has the quote. You know, he woke up feeling dangerous today. Like that's, you know, an all-time quote from any player, you know, in the NFL. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what there's not to love about Baker. It's interesting because I feel like a lot of people are always like they don't want to put somebody too high because they're afraid of like, oh, well, we haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen him get to that level yet, so we should wait. I don't know. I've never understood that take. It was the same thing with Patrick Mahomes last year. Nobody wanted to put him, you know, even inside the top 10. And I had him inside the top 5 in my pre-draft rankings last year. And people thought, oh, that's way too bold. That's crazy. And, well, we know how that worked out. And, like, sometimes you just got to put your nuts on the table and just and not be afraid of what the public opinion is on you know how you feel about this, which is kind of my rankings because I don't care really what anybody thinks. I know I'm right, and y'all
we
can
have a lot of that in our rankings. So as I looked through our rankings, I was happy to see things like that. I mean, I was the sole guy with Jared Goff in my top 10 between the 3 of us, and then you know Ryan was by himself with Dak Prescott in the top 10. Well, we'll talk about both of those guys as well. But Ryan, you also have Russell Wilson in the top 5. You were the only one of the 3 of us who did. Kevin and I both had him at 7. I mean, there's been reports that Russell Wilson may not even be in a Seahawks uniform, which I think is just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But where there's smoke, there's fire, and there's been enough smoke on this story that I'm actually starting to believe it. So Russell Wilson was fantastic in the second half of last year. He finished as the 4th quarterback overall in the 3rd and 4th quarters of the fantasy season. So what pushed you to push him into your top 5?
Yeah, and I mean, you hit on it basically. It's just the second half of the year and just how he was learning how to play without Doug Baldwin. I mean, I don't think it goes without saying that Doug Baldwin being hurt to start the year really put a toll on the entire offense, and they kind of had to figure out how to do it with guys like David Moore and getting Tyler Lockett more involved, getting the running game started with Chris Carson. But this guy's just a gamer. I mean, he's kind of like one of the first, he's one of the first guys who kind of like established that kind of just play from behind kind of swagger where, it doesn't need to be sexy all the way through from the beginning, but he just finds a way to do it. And he's just sneakily always seems to be up in the top tier when he's successful. Now, the Doug Baldwin injury does worry me. He's going on, I believe, his 3rd surgery of the offseason with the hernia problems that he's going through. But Russell Wilson, if he can get back to the dynamic playmaking and running when they get into the red zone, I think that'd be huge. Last year, he didn't have any rushing touchdowns on the ground, and the previous year he had 5, and that's kind of what catapulted him up there in the ranks to get that number 1 spot 2 years ago now. So, but yeah, and like you said, we don't know where he ends up being, but there's not too many landing spots where the guy could end up that would make sense. And one of the big question marks is, does he go to New York? And if he ends up in New York, this guy is going to be up there in the top 5 for me. As far as like having Saquon there, even though OBJ is not there, like he's just going to be able to do dynamic things with Evan Ingram, Saquon. And he hasn't really had household names, quote unquote, to, throw the ball to, and he still is up there in the ranks every year. So for me, it's just I've seen Russell Wilson do it time and time again. The Seattle has the 21st pick. A lot of touts have been putting them to get a defensive player, but I still think they can make a move to get a wide receiver in there and kind of move Tyler Lockett to that slot position, which Doug Baldwin has pretty much had a hold on and has been great at over the past couple of years. So if they can get the passing game together with Chris Carson, I do think you see Russell Wilson research back into that top 5.
A lot of upset Doug Baldwin owners last year. I mean, and understandably so. The guy just was essentially disappeared. Tyler Lockett took over, and Lockett had his breakout season finally that everybody in the fantasy universe has been calling for like 3 years in a row. We finally got Tyler Lockett to have his breakout year. Kev, a little surprised to see Aaron Rodgers at 4. I know I'm the highest on him, putting him at 2. I think all of this commotion around there, I just did say that where there's smoke, there's fire, but actually in this case, in the rare instance of me actually knowing some information, is one of my coworkers also works for the Packers and knows Aaron Rodgers personally, and he thinks this whole thing is just a made-up story, essentially. I'm just being a little bit nicer than the way he put it. But anyways, what he told me is that Aaron Rodgers is like one of the most stand-up guys he's ever met, and he would never turn his back on his friends ever, and he considered McCarthy a friend. So, I mean, take that for what it is. I don't know. I've never liked...
You heard it here first.
I've never been a fan of Bleacher Report. I understand the guy who did the article is a pretty good article writer and a pretty good researcher, but in this case, I'm not buying into it. That said, going back to football for a second, and probably for the rest of the show, so I don't have to talk about that anymore. Aaron Rodgers was a top 10 quarterback in each of the last second, third, and fourth quarter of the fantasy season. You may notice that I'm breaking everything up into quarters this time, guys. I did some research, and I've heard the NFL coaches break the season into quarters, so I decided to do that for today's show, and maybe all the other ranking shows too. It actually brought some nice insight that I didn't really think about. My one concern with Rodgers is the weaponry. Where is it? Devontae Adams is there. Then they have Geronimo Allison and Valdez-Scantling. I don't really buy too much into either of those guys, so that would be my major concern, but I still can't turn my back on A-Rod being a top 3 fantasy option.
So I think that Aaron Rodgers is somebody that I think is very, so for me, I had Mahomes, Baker, and then Andrew Luck, and then Aaron Rodgers. And for me, I think you could really jumble any of those, outside of Patrick Mahomes, those other two with him, and I wouldn't be mad at you whatsoever. I do think he bounces back, even though it's kind of funny because, he still finishes QB7, but he just wasn't the same guy last year that you kind of expect. That really where it really hurt you was the touchdown department. He only threw 25 touchdowns last year. But he did throw for 4,400 yards. So, I don't think there's any concern there. The average depth of target is still there for them. I do think that losing Geronimo Allison when he went out with injury last year did hurt. I do think that is an underrated weapon that they do have. And then, they really invested in the wide receiver position the last couple of years through the draft. And if one of these other guys can really step up and really be a dominant number 2 for them, they lost Randall Cobb. So, I do think the pieces are there. And, in fantasy drafts, coming, here in a few months, looking at these pieces that Aaron Rodgers has, as long as they don't, invest highly again in another wide receiver, I think a Geronimo Allison or Equanimeous St. Brown could really be, especially at a late round target. But Aaron Rodgers, like I said, I like Aaron Rodgers still. And I think this year is going to be interesting because I think you're going to be able to get him at a reduced value that you normally would ever see him, because normally goes in the second and third round. And I don't think you're going to see that. I think you're going to see him kind of go in that 5th, 6th range. And I'm not a guy who takes a quarterback early, but I would be a little tempted if Aaron Rodgers is sitting there, in the 5th or 6th round of a draft, because I think he still provides, that upside of being the number one, and wouldn't be surprised if he finishes the number one overall quarterback this year. Like, I do think that he is going to be a man on a mission this year with everything that's been said. I don't believe that him and Mike McCarthy had a good relationship at all. Like Mike McCarthy, but we've also been begging the Packers to fire Mike McCarthy for the last 2 or 3 years. He is a horrible coach. He built his reputation off of Aaron Rodgers and having one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game. That's the only reason he still has a job. And I think it speaks volumes that he doesn't have a job now. Like, if he was so great, why did nobody bring him in as a head coach? So, I think that says enough there about Mike McCarthy. So with Aaron Rodgers, I definitely think if you wanted to take him, you have him at 2. There's nothing wrong with that. I feel like him, Andrew Luck, and Baker Mayfield are kind of all interchangeable in my opinion.
Top of the draft at the quarterback position, closer than it's ever been before outside of Mahomes. I agree. I mean, 5th or 6th round, that reminds me of Drew Brees just a couple years ago, where everybody was down on him. He came off of I think it was the first season without. Nah, it couldn't have been the first season without Graham. That's way too long ago at this point. But anyways, he was. I mean, people were down on Breeze a few years ago. He fell to me in the 6th round, ended up blowing up that year, and that just reminds me of the Rodgers situation this year. A little later on in our rankings, guys, we have in the 8, 9, and 10 range, we have a lot of, let's call it, diversity amongst our selections. So I went ahead and I took the highest ranked person from each list that nobody else has. For me, that was Jared Goff at 8. For Kevin, it was Jameis Winston at 9. And for Ryan, it was Dak Prescott at 10. So I want to do a little head-to-head of the Goff, Winston, Prescott. I'm going to start with you, Ryan, because I actually had Prescott as one of my sleepers for this year after looking at the stats. And you have him in the top 10, so maybe not such a sleeper after all.
No, I still think he is a sleeper. I'm just going to be a little bit bullish on him this year. I feel like and it all comes down to the Amari Cooper acquisition. And I don't think it can be overstated. I mean, you can say what you want about, kind of just thinking outside the box or maybe reaching about this acquisition, but the facts speak for themselves. When before, weeks 1 through 8, before Amari Cooper got there, this offense was anemic. It was trash. Dak Prescott looked like a shell of himself and didn't seem to be able to carry this offense after, having a star receiver in Des Bryant for so long that he could really rely on and lean to when people were loading up the box to defend against Zeke. And Zeke's going to do his thing no matter what. But I do think it was important to bring in a guy like Amari Cooper who could kind of spread the field and give him a target that he could rely on and throw to when the pass didn't really have to be perfect. But as long as he got it in the area, Cooper was going to pull it down. And in those last couple of weeks from week 9 on, if you would have extrapolated out his stats, he would have gone for about 4,300 yards and 32 total touchdowns, which would have had him right up there amongst the top tier quarterbacks. So he was number 6 from week 9 on with 20 points per game. And I just think it's going to be, the same type of storyline going into the next season. They got a lot, riding on them to kind of, make noise in the playoffs, and they really haven't been able to do a lot. And Dak Prescott is going to carry the weight on his shoulders. I could see him being a lot more mobile this year and trying to score within the red zone too, that we kind of saw there in the playoffs and towards the end of the season. And this is just a guy who, when he has the ball in his hands, has the potential to make plays. And that's really what I want from my fantasy quarterback. So when you get down into the, really the 8 to 12 range and the quarterback ones, when you're projecting them, like I just look for guys who do have that upside, who can, who do have playmakers around them and can, really, get points other than just standing in the pocket and throwing to whomever. So I really like his position and outlook for 2019.
All right, Kev, your time to shine with Jameis Winston. We will compare the 3 as far as where each of us has the others ranked after. but it is your time to shine with Mr. Jameis Winston, who you admitted before the show you almost put in the top 5.
I love Jameis. So this year, having Bruce Arians there as the head coach, I think is going to do wonders for him. We saw what he was able to do with a quarterback like Carson Palmer. Carson Palmer was kind of fading away, fading out. And he basically resurrected his career. Jameis Winston is still obviously very young. Last year, played 11 games, was in that quarterback carousel that was Tampa Bay, that was just awful. However, heading into 2019, I mean, their offense is very, very good. I mean, they have Mike Evans, you have Chris Godwin, you have Justin Watson, who should be the number 3 wide receiver, who is not a household name. Not many people know who he is. Uber athletic, great, would be an excellent fill or excellent spot for to play out of the slot. And then the only concern you really have with them right now would be at running back, because then they also have O.J. Howard, and then they still have Cameron Brate. So really, the only thing they don't have is a running back yet, and I do think they addressed that via the draft. We saw, Bruce Arians, draft David Johnson a few years ago. I do think that they are going to be able to find something in this draft. This draft is not loaded with, household, big time names, but I do think that there is some talent to be had. So overall, the weapons are there. I love the coaching change. I think that they are going to be a very dynamic offense. And I just think he really takes a big step forward last year. Even in 11 games that he played, he threw for almost 3,000 yards, had 19 touchdowns. So I have no problem with Jameis. I think Jameis really should be a lock for the top 10. I will be taking him everywhere. Of all the quarterbacks that didn't have a great, quote unquote great year, partially because he didn't play, I think he has the brightest outlook of all of them. And so I don't know what there's not to like with Jameis Winston. Even last year, I mean, he really hasn't been somebody that's shown a true ability to really be a running quarterback. But he even had 281 yards rushing last year. So I do think there's some upside there, and I do think that the ceiling that we've all thought that could be there is still there. And I think now with the right coach in place, the right system, with all the weapons that they have around them, without Ryan Fitzpatrick and all the nonsense of who's going to start and what they're going to do with them, I think this year that you see him explode, and 4,000 yards and 35 touchdowns, I definitely think is in the range of possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce Arians is on record as saying he loves Peyton Barber. We'll see if that's a smokescreen come draft time. But you're not far off with Jameis Winston. Had only one quarter of last season where he got to play all 4 games in that segment, and he finished 13th. That was week 13 through 16. He was the 13th overall quarterback in that time. I think you make a lot of good points there. The Godwin kid, everybody is hyping this kid up, Arians especially. Looks like he might be in for a breakout season. I must say I'm a little surprised you guys don't have Goff a little higher, and I know people love to hate on Jared Goff, but we're talking about a guy that finished 3rd overall in QB ranking quarter 1 and quarter 3 last year. He was 12th in quarter 2 before just absolutely finishing the season on the worst possible note, 29 out of 32 in quarterbacks, which I don't know what happened. He imploded or something. I know
he came to Chicago, Ant. That's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, geez, he just absolutely got destroyed the last 4 weeks of the season. Amazingly enough, during his bye week when he only played 3 games, he was the 3rd overall quarterback during that 4-game span, which is pretty crazy to think about. He only played 3 out of the 4 games there. Listen, they don't have much in terms of additions this offseason. Cooper Kupp will be coming back, which I think you'll see makes a huge difference. Cooper Kupp went out week 10 last year, so he missed a good portion of the season, and they re-signed Malcolm Brown. So outside of that, they haven't done much. But I thought Jared Goff showed a heck of a lot last year. For 12 weeks of the season, he was in the top 3 quarterback ranking as a fantasy quarterback. I'm pretty sure people were talking about him as an MVP candidate until Mahomes just went off, and he lost that race pretty quickly. But he was neck and neck with Mahomes in the first quarter of the season, and then he just couldn't keep up. And I don't know many people that could keep up. So I'm a little surprised you guys don't have Goff. I would like to hear your insights on where you have Goff and why he's outside of the top 10. Maybe I'm missing something.
No. Kev.
That's not analysis, Kev. Just to let you know. That's Twitter trolling, not analysis.
No, Ryan, go first, and I'll explain, because Ryan already knows what I think, my thoughts on Jared Goff, because we talked about in the DFS DJ Nation pod last year. But go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, he's definitely a Jared Goff hater. It's not so much that for me, but like you said, and towards the end of the year, he did struggle, and so I'm kind of looking at their opponents this year, and you're going on the road, playing in Seattle. That's a tough place to play. Playing in Dallas, playing against the Panthers, playing in Cleveland, at home against the Saints, at home against the Bears, and at home against San Francisco, who should, get Jimmy Garoppolo back, and we'll see how they're going to fare this year. But he's got a tough schedule ahead, especially on the defensive side. Ravens, you throw them in there, Bengals too. And while they do have the weapons there, and that hasn't changed. It just, when I was looking at these other guys, I just think they can do a little bit more, and might be a little bit relied on heavily. The Rams, they're so explosive offensively that it doesn't necessarily have to come at Jared Goff's hand. If Gurley comes back healthy, the defense is strong. They can put up points, and he just might be in a position where he's not really forced to run up the score. And McVay is creative, so it was hard for me to not include him in the top 10. But there's just a couple other elements that I think factor in that just might not have Goff where we think he should be. So, that could change for me towards the end. But for me, it was just looking at his schedule and looking at how he struggled against tough defenses and kind of projecting that for 2019.
So for me, like, Jared Goff is the guy that he is overhyped on some levels, and I think then there's the side that's like it hates him. I don't necessarily hate him. I just don't think he's as good as what people think he is. Like, he is never he is Derek Carr, and like that's what I've said in the past, and I still 100% believe that. Like, he has to be surrounded by elite talent. He's never somebody that's going to really put the team on his back and carry them for prolonged stretches. Anytime they go up against a really good defense, he seems to struggle. We've seen that multiple times, and that's the same thing that Derek Carr was early in his career, where you would see Derek Carr's MVP season almost MVP season that he had. Like, he balled against really bad defense to put up big numbers and everything else. But anytime they played a defense that was even above average, he tended to struggle, and that's Jared Goff. And so, but in terms of fantasy, they have the pieces, with Cooper Kupp. That was such a huge loss for them last year. As soon as he went out, it kind of changed their offense a lot. They still have Robert Woods and Brandon Cooks, and they still have Gerald Everett, Todd Gurley, whatever's going on with his knee. But I do think that he sees a reduced workload next year. So for Jared Goff, I still think he's a top 12 option. He's still a QB1 in terms of fantasy. I just don't think how he doesn't get to that point. But I just have a struggle putting him into the top 10. But I do think that that the upside is certainly there for him with the offense that they have and the pieces that they still have. Barring everybody stays healthy. But I'm not in the business of trying to predict who's going to get hurt and who's not. So for me, I think the most jarring thing, though, was seeing that you guys have Mitchell Trubisky in the top 10, which is kind of almost poetic because last year around this time, I was the lone guy when we did a podcast that loved Trubisky and said he was going to be a QB1. And I got laughed off the podcast when I said that. Everyone was like, "You're such an idiot." He nearly finished as a QB1 last year. He would have finished as a QB1 had he not missed 2 games. So for me, that really paid off, because I still like Trubisky. I like the pieces that they have there, but putting him inside my top 10 right now seems a little rich. But I do like that offense. But why do you guys feel like he should be included inside that top 10 right now?
I love how Kev was giving himself credit for calling him a QB1, and then he didn't finish as QB1. So null and void point there.
No, but had he only 14 games, bud. 14 games. He finished with
okay, but count him.
Okay.
You can't help that he said. I mean, Peyton Manning used to sit too.
He didn't sit. He was hurt.
It was hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Come on, you're supposed to be a Bears fan, bro.
Ryan's one of those people with two favorite teams, which drives me absolutely bonkers. Don't have two favorite teams, people. Commit to one team.
Damn.
Which one's the side piece? Which one? That's what I want to know. Which one's the main? Which one's the main, and which one's the side piece?
That's a good question.
Oh, Bears are the main. Steelers are the side piece, which is why I got the guy in the sleepers.
I feel like that would have changed if it was a couple years ago. I feel like he's changing it because the Steelers are like nosediving with the loss of Antonio Brown and Le'Veon.
That seems
no. You've asked me multiple times what I would do if the Bears and Steelers made it to the Super Bowl, and I always answer Bears.
Okay. So, anyways, yes, let's hear
okay. So Mitchell's legs, I mean, that's one thing. I mean, the guy's pretty dynamic running the ball. No Jordan Howard there. I'm not on the Mike Davis train. We talked about that off the pod about how he's going to be viewed unless they make another move there, and people are going to be buying into Mike Davis being there. But Mitchell is I'm liking guys who are the offense. That's why Dak Prescott made it in my top 10 for me as well, too, because they're just going to be lean so heavily on making plays. And while they still don't have really a dynamic wide receiver weapon, so to speak, being able to utilize Tariq Cohen more in the slot and out of the backfield, Allen Robinson another year in this offense with Matt Nagy. I mean, all the rest of these guys another year. Taylor Gabriel coming back, and Anthony Miller hopefully coming back healthy and strong from the offseason. I think he's got enough weapons around him to definitely get into the top 10. And he's also going to have, I feel like, a lot of red zone opportunities created by the defense and giving him short fields to play with, so he doesn't have to go down the field and throw the ball and make all the plays with his arm. They were a pretty good red zone offense last year when they got there, and that's definitely when I went out of my quarterback. So for me, it comes down to guys like Mitchell and Dak having to do a lot more for their teams than some of these other guys, because a lot more is going to be asked of them.
I have a very important question for you guys before I answer this. Have you seen how big Cordero Patterson is? And how fast this man runs? It's shocking to me. It's like Andre the Giant's running a 4.2. Like, his guy playing for the New England Patriots last year was my first chance to really get to see him a lot. I didn't watch the Raiders. Who did? He gets on with the Patriots. He turns into this offensive weapon that nobody knew they had. Now he signs with the Chicago Bears. Will they use him the same way? Probably not. Nobody uses these Patriots players the same way. But I think that's a nice addition to him, in addition to the guys that you named. I remember last year there was one week where Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller were the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2. I don't remember which week it was, but Mitch just blew up. I think he scored like 55 fantasy points in 6-point touchdown performances. I mean, the thing with Mitch is he finished QB6 in the quarter where he had his bye. He was just outside of a QB1 for Q1 and Q3, and then he got hurt, right? And he just wasn't throwing the ball the same in Q4. I mean, you could see it. You just watch this guy play. He could not sling the ball when he came back. And then Bears, sadly, their season ends in the playoffs in terrible fashion. They should have. I feel like you guys had a good chance to go to the big game if you were healthy, but such is the NFL. Better luck next year.
Salt in the wound.
Yeah, sorry, man. At least your team's getting that far. My team doesn't know what the hell the playoffs look like. So, yeah, I mean, that's it for me. That's it. Trubisky had a fantastic year. I mean, and I don't think towards the end of the top 10, there's not that many guys that I'm really excited about. I mean, if you look at the guys who finished there last year, Big Ben, but then he just lost AB, and then Phillip Rivers, Mr. Consistent, but not a guy I like to put in the top 10. At least, if we're looking at this top 10 as this is the order you would draft these guys. So I'm going to go for the young guy with the potential here. It was tough not putting Carson Wentz there, but I think the Wentz injury history kind of pushed me more away from him than away from Trubisky. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think Carson Wentz is another interesting player this year that I think a lot of people are going to be down on because of the injury history that he's had. Mm-hmm. But I do think that – so what I have him inside my top 10. One, I will be interested to see if they get him back to running a little bit more. I know with the injury history, they may err on the side of caution with that. But in his first year, in his rookie year, or no, excuse me, his second year, when he really broke out, like that was one of the things that made him really dynamic. Now, being another year removed from the ACL injury, I do think that it would be. I do think it's possible that he runs a little bit more, but for me, I just think the weapons are all still there. They still have Zach Ertz, they still have Alshon. I think the signing of Deshaun Jackson, which we've talked about on another show, is just paramount for him. They have not had a true dynamic deep threat his entire career there since he's been in the league. I think adding that piece to the offense with Doug Peterson, who is a terrific head coach and a great offensive mind, I do think Carson Wentz get back to being the guy that he was. And so that's why I have him inside my top 10. It's tough because there's some other guys that I kind of went back and forth on, And so, but I just think that he's a safe bet. And I think another player that you're going to get with, you can get, at a pretty decent value this year, I think, in drafts because a lot of these other guys, the quarterback position, we say it every year, it just continues to get deeper and deeper where it makes zero sense to ever really draft a quarterback early because this position is so deep. I feel like really quarterback 10, 11, 12, till 21 or 22, you could mix them up all around, and I probably wouldn't have a problem with it. I just think it's so deep there. Guys, we don't have Tom Brady in our top 10. And I don't think he's going to be in many people's top 10, if any, this year. Right. Cam Newton is a guy who's a staple for the top 10 that we don't have. There's guys that we don't have. Kirk Cousins finished as a top 12 quarterback last year in fantasy, and we don't. Because he struggled in a lot of games, especially down the stretch, that we kind of forget about that. But he still threw for 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns. And right now, in ADP in most drafts, you can get him in the 16th, 17th, 18th quarterback off the board. That is insane. Between him and another guy we'll talk about, incredible value this year at the quarterback position, but it's crazy that we don't even have Tom Brady inside. I mean, this might be the first year maybe in the last 10, 15 years that he's not inside the top 10.
They picked up your boy Charles Johnson from the AAF.
Oh my goodness.
No, but Charles Johnson is such a beast, right? What's so sad about it is he dominated in the preseason last year. I think it was for the Jets. I mean, I remember playing him in DFS last year, and we talked about him then. And then, of course, he got cut, didn't make the roster, and then, he goes to the AAF and dominates. That's not surprising. Dude can ball. He's got game.
Fall off so quickly either. I mean, that season what he had with the Vikings was fantastic. All you could do was hope they would continue. Then the next year he did absolutely nothing. It was honestly baffling, but. I do want to get into these guys who are post top 10 because like you said, there are so many of them. Ryan, you have Dak in your top 10. I have him at 12, right? He's not far off. Right. I have Carson Wentz at 13. I have Cam Newton at 11, which a lot of people are going to stay off Cam because of the injury. But, it looks like he's going to be good to go. And this is a guy who I never really draft because I always feel like his value is too high because people put a lot of value in running quarterbacks. But I mean, Cam finished a top 5 quarterback in 2 quarters last year. Q2 and Q3, and then in Q1 he had a bye week 4. He was still a top 16, so he was almost a quarterback 1. And then he got hurt. So Q4 he only played 1 game. But that's a guy. If you can, that might be a guy I'm targeting because typically I play 16 round drafts and I take my quarterback in round 15 or round 16. And I feel like, Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, Cam Newton may be guys you can get in round 15, round 16 this year, and just crazy value.
Well, I think with Cam, it's going to really have more to do with what we find out about his injury, right? Because I think it's like an Andrew Luck situation, and that's what has me nervous, because that's really where Cam Newton's value really is, because he's not a guy who's going to get you. I mean, he had the one outlier season where he had the 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns. That's not typically who he is. Typically, he's in that 3 to 35, 3,600 yard, passing yard range. He's going to get you 20 to 25 passing touchdowns. if he doesn't have that rushing value, then he's not worth it at all. And so he is a gamble because, again, because of the shoulder injury, because of all that, do they rein him in and do not allow him to rush that much? So I think that's why he is sort of a tricky guy this year, because if you get him late and they allow him to continue to run, like last year, he had almost in 14 games, he had almost 500 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns. I mean, when healthy, he's a player who can lead the league among quarterbacks in rushing. Like, we know that's his upside, and that's why it makes him what makes him so intriguing as an option every year, because of that rushing upside that we're looking for. However, with the injuries and the concussions and everything else stacking up, eventually they're going to have to stop him from running. And when that happens, if it doesn't follow him, because now, like with their offense and their passing game, Greg Olson's coming back, but Greg Olson's is right up there with Antonio Gates with AARP Club. Like, I mean, loves the man. Like, the worst trade ever when the Bears traded him to the Panthers, But, like, I mean, they have DJ Moore, who I love, and then Samuel. Curtis Samuel, who's very dynamic, but more of a best ball guy. But, like, unless they, again, attack the draft with wide receivers, because they've never really felt like they really wanted to surround him with premier pass catchers in his career. And, DJ Moore was kind of the first guy that we've seen that really I'm really excited about. But that's the problem with Cam Newton. If Cam Newton doesn't have that rushing upside, then I would be really scared to take him.
McCaffrey, who has 237 targets in 2 seasons. It's a running back, guys. What is happening?
Unbelievable. And Kev, to your point, it's not just the wide receivers too. It's that offensive line. They have one of the bottom tier offensive lines as well too. So coming off a shoulder injury, like, they're not going to allow him to just go out there and be the Superman Cam Newton that we're used to seeing. So it is kind of a situation that just needs to be closely monitored before you take a risk on a guy like that to be your starting quarterback for fantasy in 2019.
The biggest riser and faller as the offseason progresses, as we get to the summer and we get more reports, and then we get to July and we get even more reports, and then August the picture becomes clearer because preseason starts and all that. I mean, this could be a guy, one bad report drops him down 10 spots, one good report picks him up another 10. I mean, he's going to be pretty volatile as far as where he's ranked. If you guys don't have anybody else to talk about as far as the 10 to 20, 11 to 20 range or whatever, I do have one more question for you. So,
ooh, let's go.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the rest of last year's rookies outside of Baker Mayfield. We saw some good stuff, mostly with their legs, with Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Who else am I missing? Sam Darnold has a lot of new weapons and a new offensive-minded coach for the first time. So maybe not guys you're drafting, maybe guys you're keeping an eye on as waiver pickups and trying to get them a week sooner than everybody else. But who has the best chance to have a QB1 season out of these 3?
Josh Allen, Lamar, or who?
Sam Darnold.
Yeah. I like Josh Allen a lot. I mean, the guy's a running back. That's really what it comes down to for me, Anthony, is like these quarterbacks who are not acting like running backs, but do have the rushing upside. I mean, and all of these guys are part of this young class. It's just a wave that we've seen, even from the Russell Wilsons to Andrew Lucks when they came in. Now you got guys like Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, even Baker Mayfield can at least make plays with his feet. All of these quarterbacks now can't just be one-dimensional and stay in the pocket. And if you are, you have to be pretty damn near phenomenal at throwing the football, like a Ben Roethlisberger, or he's not phenomenal, but a gunslinger like a Ryan Fitzpatrick, where they can just put up yards on these deep balls, and not every quarterback has the ability to do that. So the guys that have this rushing upside, even with Josh Allen, where his throws aren't necessarily, there, he definitely needs some work, but this guy was rushing for over 100 yards a game average at a certain point in the season last year. So those guys are always going to intrigue me, especially when they're the offense. And with Shady McCoy, not being there as well too, and him just having to puts more pressure on him or allows him to do more in the offense. I really like guys like that. But Sam Darnold is probably the second one for me, just with the addition of Le'Veon and Quincy Enunwa, if he's going to be healthy, Robbie Anderson there. He definitely has a good outlook. Yeah, Jamison Crowder, exactly. He has a good outlook with weapons, but I do tend to lean the guys who have the rushing
upside. Two of those rushing games, 100 yards, were against Miami, and then another one was against the Jets. So he really kind of had fun against the AFC East opponents.
Speaking of Josh Allen, here's an interesting little stat for you. From weeks 12 through 17 last year, Josh Allen ranked as the number one overall fantasy quarterback. Over that span, he threw for 200 yards or more 5 times and ran for at least 100 yards twice. His 631 rushing yards in 2018 were more than Dalvin Cook, Kenyon Drake, and LaShawn McCoy.
Yeah, he had a good end of the season, man. He really kind of. I mean, I don't even remember anybody playing him either, but he had a really good finish to the season. So, Kev, what do you think? Who has the best chance? Are you jumping on that Josh Allen train as well?
Real quick, but shout out to Corey Evans on Twitter. That's where I saw that from. I don't like steal people's stats. Anyways, people don't do that. I don't like that. Anyway, no, for me it's Sam Darnold. Like, of the not named Baker Mayfield guys.
Right.
I think it's definitely Sam Darnold. I think he is the highest upside, especially with the offense that surrounds him. I just think that we saw, especially earlier in the year with Sam Darnold, the main thing that I want to see from them really is upgrading the offensive line. That's the one thing that I want to see, especially through this draft, them focus on, because I do think overall, whether it's Le'Veon Bell's sake or it's Sam Darnold, is upgrading that offensive line. They definitely have some holes to fill there. Throwback to a few years ago podcast. Remember that? And anyways, by the way, Ryan, did LaShawn McCoy die? Because you said he's no longer there. Like, he's still in Buffalo.
They're looking to move him though.
I mean, yeah,
he's not going to be there on the roster starting in 2019.
And they have done an
Josh Allen.
job. The Bills have done an impressive job of assembling the ARP crew at running back there. I mean, they have LaShawn McCoy, Chris Ivory, and Frank Gore, all over 30 years old. Like, I don't know, maybe they're trendsetters here, and they see something here with this trio they have of old running backs. So, I mean, they could have picked up like a Rod Smith or anybody, but no, they have the 30+ club here. So. But
I'd be shocked if they can move him. Yeah,
it's Sam Darnold. I do think Josh Allen is intriguing, and I think people are starting to bite their tongues a little bit with him, because he was the whipping boy last year of all quarterbacks. People laughing at the Bills for drafting him, saying that he is absolutely awful. And I mean, Dynasty Twitter was this eviscerated Josh Allen and could not wait. Told you so. And it kind of blew up in their face a little bit. So people are still, hate Josh Allen. I'm just being more waiting and seeing, because I don't think his future is being able to run as much as that he does. I mean, that was very impressive, that his rushing ability. I don't think anybody thought he was going to be that kind of guy. I mean, 631 yards and 8 touchdowns and only 12 games was pretty impressive in my opinion. But so yeah, I mean, right now, looking at Fantasy Football Calculator, you have Josh Allen actually going ahead of Sam Darnold at quarterback 18 off the board, and then you have Sam Darnold at 23, and of course Josh Rosen, who is awful. Looks like is going undrafted, which he should, because he is awful. Because right now, actually, Kyler Murray actually is at 25, and this is nuts. Matt Stafford at 26.
By the way, Josh Rosen is going to have a better career than Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. You can sign me up for that bet right there, because Rosen can actually throw the ball and hit somebody with it, whereas Allen and Jackson couldn't hit the goddamn broadside of a barn. Okay, 52% for Josh Allen.
Listen, Lamar Jackson, no, I cannot take that bet with you on Lamar Jackson. I am not a huge fan of Lamar Jackson as a player, but. No, there is no way I would take Josh Allen all day, twice
No
on
way.
Sunday over Josh
Rosen.
Rosen.
52%.
Yes.
He threw 52%, and in college he
Embrace the
never
debate.
threw higher than 60%. Like, if you can't connect, you're not winning anything. Josh Rosen's a much better quarterback.
Did you see
Embrace
Josh
the
Rosen's
debate.
numbers last year? Did you see
Who
Josh
did he
Rosen's numbers last
have?
year? I don't know. Let's take a consistency here.
If
of
you're
who-
talking about AARP, he had AARP Larry Fitzgerald. He did have David Johnson and a coach who was just hung out to dry in his first
Christian
season.
Kirk.
Yeah, Christian Kirk's nice.
He was still a rookie.
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
I
for
mean,
sure. But he's nice though.
Who did Josh Allen have?
His
He had
legs,
Robert Foster,
an offensive
who
line.
ever heard of this dude ever. Like, nobody knew who Robert Foster was. In DFS last year, I remember firing him up as a 3K punt. But nobody knew who that guy was. And then they had Zay Jones, who's done nothing over his entire career, and Charles Clay at tight end. Like, they had absolutely nothing for him.
Man, the myth,
Like,
the legend right there.
Who's
okay,
Zay
but
Jones?
at least in Arizona, they had something. You know, like Larry Fitzgerald, yes, is, but he's still better than a lot of players, a lot of wide receivers in this league.
I
Like,
don't
and
think that
it's
Josh
not
Rosen's
David
going to be a better quarterback.
I don't. I think he's a bum already. Like, that's why I'm totally on board with. I hope they trade Josh Rosen and draft Kyler Murray. Like, that is the smartest thing they can do as a franchise, is to move on from an asset that they've had an entire year to see and realize that this guy is not the answer. And I'm sorry. Like, usually, yeah, I get it.
Well, that's not my argument. I don't disagree with you there. My argument is he's going to be better than Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson.
I don't care where. And then he's going to go where? Like, let's say he goes to Washington. That's a horrible landing
It's
spot
a
for him.
horrible landing spot. You're right.
Yes.
Like,
It is.
he's not, and he's going to be forced to start.
Yep.
Unless, I mean, I guess they could pull him back and I guess they have Case Keenum for a year, but
Yeah.
like, I don't think they would make that move in a thought process of doing that. Like, I can't imagine they would trade that and then let him sit behind Case Keenum. I don't know.
danger
Like,
is if Rosen ends up in New England, that's the danger. That's the danger right there.
I think there's a better chance that the Patriots trade up in this draft and take a quarterback. Like, they like, we heard about that last year with Baker Mayfield. They had serious interest in doing that. I think they could move up this year and take a quarterback. Like, they have the draft picks to be able to move up and make something like that happen.
You think they really like any of these guys, though? I mean, like, this Locke and Haskins and Jones have so many question marks.
But isn't that how the last 2 or 3 years of quarterbacks have really been?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
I mean, look at 2 years ago with the Baker Mayfield or the Deshaun Watson,
Deshaun and
Trubisky,
Patrick, yeah.
and Patrick Mahomes. Like, if you remember, you go back to this time, that it's easy now to look back and be like, oh yeah, look how great Mahomes has been,
Right.
and Watson. People were not thinking that about Patrick Mahomes.
Before-
I love
Yeah.
Mahomes, but a lot of people were like, oh, this guy's going to be a bust.
Yeah.
He's not ever going to be accurate. Oh, he's got a big arm, but who cares? That's like
I
Paxton
love that
Lynch and
people
blah blah
compared him
blah.
to Brett Favre, and then they said he was going to be trash. Like, wait a second. What did I miss? Was Brett
No,
Favre
it
trash?
happens all the time. I mean, they did that with Jared Goff and Wentz, even, to a point when all that stuff happens. So
We've just gotten so used to bad quarterback classes, like the year with Ponder and Locker and Gabbert and whatever other
Hey.
shitty quarterbacks were in that first round there. And then the following year, I think EJ Manuel was the only guy taken in the first round. We've just gotten so used to those crappy classes.
Well, we've been on a really big run of quarterbacks, though, if you think about it. The last,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, of really that. At one point, you kind of looked at it like, man, the quarterback position is a little bleak around the NFL. Like, you have the elite class and then a huge drop off. Like, it's the last couple of years, and every year it's like, wait till next year's draft. Just wait till next year's when these quarterbacks
Every year.
come.
Yeah,
and,
every year.
and then next year comes, and then we destroy them, and then Dynasty Twitter and NFL Twitter destroys these guys and talks about how all these holes and whatever, and then it's wait till next year. Just wait till next year. It's now
It's so
this
true.
year, it's all about Tua, for next year, and Herbert from Oregon, And that everyone's like, yeah, just wait till then. Wait till next year. And then again, next year we're going to be doing the same conversation where I don't know about this guy, man. Everyone's going to destroy these dudes. It's what happens. It's the one thing that I respect the hustle of these guys that put in the work to game fill grind and all the stuff for these rookies and everything that are coming out. But far too often we go either way too far on one player or we go way too far the other way. Yeah. I'll never forget always Jeremy McNichols, like fantasy Twitter or dynasty Twitter.
Oh my goodness, man.
He was supposed to be the truth, and this guy was going to come out. He's the next David Johnson.
What did he end up?
He's the next David Johnson
pick or something. I know he went to the Bucks, but it was way late.
Yeah, and then he got cut, and he's never been anything ever.
He never played a game in the NFL.
Yes. So Dynasty Twitter, it makes me laugh every time with some of these guys because they overanalyze sometimes with these guys.
I really Mahomes and Watson and Trubisky all made the playoffs last year, and they made it a point to point out that everybody called them trash during that draft, and all three of them were in the playoffs, which was just it was the ultimate middle finger to everybody out there.
Yeah, it just goes to show that we do not know nearly as much as we think that we know. No. In general, I guess.
I was listening to a Dolphins podcast today, and they mentioned that there's 25 or 26 teams that either have a quarterback they're building around or are happy with the quarterback that they have. And it's that's crazy. I remember, like you said, a few years ago on this podcast, we were talking about how there wasn't enough quarterback talent, and we were worried for the league because of it. And now here we are, flash forward 4 years later, and almost every team in the league has a quarterback that they want to at least build around, whether or not that person ends up being good or not.
Yeah, especially the Giants with Eli Manning. No, I'm just kidding.
That is the worst. And did you see that there's talk about extending Eli Manning?
Yes.
I'm like, get out of town, Dave Gettleman.
Dude, but you got to respect the Giants for just going all in on it. I'm going to hate, but that is just amazing to me that they're just you know what? Not only are we moving great players because of Eli, but we're also going to go all in on this guy too. We're just all 2 rings he got us, so he's just going to be sticking around for the long haul. Don't matter if your A-Dot's going down, Eli. It doesn't matter if the city of New York hates you. We're going to keep you around for a couple more.
The Cardinals won't even openly admit that they're drafting Kyler Murray first round, but the Giants, on the other hand, are Eli Manning's the guy. He's in his prime. He's got 5 years left. Eli's
amazing.
Eli's not the problem.
Absolutely amazing.
Eli is living his best life, no doubt. Just the man is getting paid millions and being horrible.
He's not just convincing coaches. Golden Tate signed there voluntarily for a multi-year deal. In NFL circles, he's much more respected than in fantasy circles. That's for sure.
True enough. Yeah. True enough.
So how many teams do you think though that desperately need a quarterback? You have Miami,
the Dolphins, the Giants, the Redskins. Unless Alex Smith comes back.
Miami got fit magic.
Yeah. We'll see about Tampa, right? There's been a ton of talk about Tampa. Every year, it's Jameis gets one more year. Jameis gets one more year. So we'll see how that turns out.
I believe he's on his 5th year. Yeah, he's on his 5th year option this year. So, he's a free agent next year. Obviously they could always re-sign him or...
I would say Tennessee.
Yeah.
Titans.
Oh, yeah. Kev is on that Tennessee train. Needing a quarterback.
Maybe Jacksonville. If Foles goes back to being the Foles that we've seen start any significant time in the past, Jacksonville's going to be looking for a quarterback again.
Yeah, I'm nervous about Foles there.
We don't know anything about Garoppolo really in San Francisco. He had 5 good games. That's it.
Yeah, he low-key last year, start the year, was not that great. No. He did not, I don't know. I know, the hype around him is not nothing this year because of the injury, and no one's really talked about him. I do think now that he's not going to be nearly as high or cost nearly as much, I think, in drafts. this year that I think you can take him as a reasonable, late round flyer and, see what happens, because I think you have to like that offense with Kyle Shanahan there mainly. That's the only reason. I really, really pray and hope that maybe the 49ers decide to actually invest in their wide receiver core, because it doesn't seem like something they really want to do. Like, they've had opportunities. They were involved in the Odell Beckham sweepstakes there, and they were heavily involved in it and didn't get him. But I think that's going to be interesting. And I think the other one, probably as we sort of talked about before, would be Andy Dalton. I think he may be on. I think he is on very thin ice, and would not surprise. He's probably going to be playing somewhere else next year.
We love the Bengals backups, right? Like, a few years ago, everybody wanted A.J. McCarron to start, and now, like, Jeff Driscoll had a few appearances. Everybody's like, oh, my God, put Jeff Driscoll in. He's going to be the man. Like, we love to just punt Andy Dalton to the ground. By the way, he had a top 10 QB finish in one of the quarters last year, which is, like, one of the most shocking things in my research. I was like, what happened? Dalton, you're alive?
I mean, if like, the Bengals are a team that I just can never quit, because, like, I feel like, because they have the pieces. They have AJ Green. We saw Tyler Boyd step up last year and really have a big impact. Joe Mixon. I mean, they still have, I think they brought Tyler Eifert back, who, again, another guy who can stay healthy. Like, they have the pieces to be a respectable offense, but I don't know. Like, it's like they're just cursed with injuries. Finally, they moved on from Marvin Lewis, who's the guy that we felt like, did he have some sort of dirt against management there? Because that dude hung on there longer than any or any head coach ever should have. But they're a team that I think is somewhat interesting too, because Andy Dalton's not even being drafted. He's not even showing up in ADP right now. That's how much people hate Andy Dalton.
The coach, though. I mean, they hired a guy like this guy just came out of nowhere. And I know he used to be a coach in Miami. That's the only reason I knew his name. But man,
everyone looks at the next Sean McVay.
They went so raw on that one. My goodness. So I mean, it does work out. Those numbers work out. There's probably 6, 7, 8 teams that could really use a quarterback, depending on how the situation goes. We know Denver won't. John Elway will never draft a quarterback again. Apparently, he just thinks that Joe Flacco is in his prime. So, whatever.
I don't know. They've been signed Drew Lock, and I would cry if Drew Lock went to Denver. I don't want to see that.
On that note, let's wrap this bad boy up. So, we actually want to hear from you guys. Who is in your top 10 that we didn't include? Who's your top quarterback sleeper? Which guy are we just way too high on and should be nowhere near the top 10? And who are we too low on? Like, should Dak be in the top 10 for everybody? I don't know. You tell us in the comments if you're on the YouTube, or hit us up on Twitter if you are listening to the podcast. You can get us at @FF_authority. Also, don't forget, if you're listening to a podcast, to subscribe to that podcast on iTunes or Stitcher or whatever podcast software you use. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button if you love this episode, and hit that subscribe channel if you want to see more great content. So for Kevin Steele and Ryan Williams, I'm Anthony Pinzone. This has been the Fantasy Authority Podcast, Top 10 Fantasy Quarterbacks for 2019. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, embrace the debate, but have some fun with it. Bye, guys.